You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
All right, hello and welcome everybody to this week's episode of the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast. As always, this is Daniel Barrett here from AdWordsNerds.com. And look, if you need more leads or deals online for your real estate investing business, where do you go? You go over to AdWordsNerds.com. You grab a strategy session with our team for free. We will help you put together a strategy for online marketing for your market. Okay, this week I have such a fun interview. I'm talking with Chris Keller. Now, if you don't know Chris, if he's not a household name to you, particularly if you're in the investing side of this industry, I need you to stay tuned because Chris is one of the most deeply thoughtful and really insightful people I've ever had on the podcast. If you are not convinced, let me read you some of this man's bio because I'm telling you, you are going to want to listen to what he has to say. All right. So Chris earned his real estate license when he was 20 years old and built one of the most successful real estate teams in the U.S. From Rookie of the Year in 1989 to becoming the top producing agent in San Diego County and the #1 Keller Williams associate in all of North America, Keller has earned the respect of colleagues and clients for the results that he delivers. But that is not all. Chris was named president of Keller Williams Worldwide in 2010, launching the company's first regions outside of North America and leading to record productivity and profitability. In 2015, Keller was named CEO at Keller Williams, leading the transformation into the tech company that it is today. Chris then moved on to become CEO of Mellow Home and helped them double their growth, drove significant change with the experiential and product landscape for the home ownership industry. And today, Chris is Chief Real Estate Officer at Ojo Labs. They are a fascinating real estate tech company, which recently purchased Movoto, the world's 5th largest real estate website. Look, people, this is somebody who has had their hands in some of the most prominent and influential real estate companies of the last few decades. I'm telling you, this is someone you want to listen to when it comes to leadership, when it comes to the future of Proptech, when it comes to what the real estate landscape is going to look like in 5 years, and frankly, what it looks like to make wise decisions over time. So without any further ado, let's get into my conversation with Chris Keller. All right, what's up? This is Daniel Barrett. I'm here with Chris Keller. Chris, how are you, my friend? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, Dan. I'm great, and thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yes, I am super excited to talk to you. We talked a little bit before this call, and I'd had so many things I want to talk about. However, I want to start maybe in a slightly weird place, which is I want to start with your book. So you have a book out. It's called Dominant Thoughts. And anybody who's listening to this, you can go check it out at dominantthoughts.com. But I am fascinated by people who choose to go the route of writing books. And you have had this incredible career. We're going to go back over it in a little bit. But I am curious, why a book? Why decide to go into this whole process, which is a very difficult one, right? Writing a book is hard. So what made you want to pursue that?
Maybe a better question is why am I working on the second one, which I'm starting right now?
So clearly a glutton for punishment. But beyond that, what did you want to do either?
So there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I thought about it for a long time and thought it would be cool someday. About a little over a year ago, I was on a podcast with a couple other guests. And one of the other guests had written several books. And near the end of the podcast, the host said, "Hey, Chris, when are you going to write a book?" And I said, "I don't know. I've thought about it, but I'd really have to have Greg here show me how to do it because he's the pro." Just sort of jokingly. 2 days later, he called me and said, "Okay, I've had this idea. I already have the title and the URL. If you have the content, I'll show you how to do it. And we'll be co-authors, but you do all the work. I have all the contacts and I have all the knowledge." And I said, "Deal." So that's how it came about.
Yeah.
Probably the real reason why I did it is I have 4 kids between the ages of 22 and 30, almost 32. And I wanted to have an effective way to transfer some of the things I've learned to them, because dad telling them things isn't an effective way. They don't want to hear that. But, in a book, maybe one of their friends will read it and say, wow, this was really good. And they'll cause them to read it, or they'll just get around to reading it someday. So that was the other motivation.
Yeah. It does strike me that I have this fantasy, right, of like, this may be a weird fantasy to have, but in the fantasy, like I'm long dead essentially, right? And the kids like open up like a giant treasure chest in the attic. They dust it off and they're like, wow, there's like all these cool things that I wrote in there, right? And it's this idea of passing things on is so powerful. So I love that that's like your motivation. Tell people, give people the kind of elevator pitch for Dominant Thoughts, right? What's it about and why should they check it out?
It's a book on mindset and leadership. I wrote it in the form of a parable. It's a short read. It's 118 pages. It's about a mentor and a mentee that meet. And then each chapter, as the story progresses, highlights another lesson that I've learned. And in my lessons have just come from, like you said, a long career, getting to work and have opportunities, have mentors a lot of people haven't had. I've worked directly for running the companies of two self-made billionaires, and had other great mentors in my life. And so it's just taking a lot of those lessons that have helped me be successful and achieve things that are maybe out of the ordinary for someone that had the background I've had. And those are the things that I think people will like about and get out of the book.
Yeah. So, let's dive into that, because I think part of what's going to make people want to check out this book, and again, if you're listening to this, you absolutely should check it out. It's at dominantthoughts.com. Go check it out. But it's like for people who don't know you, or maybe don't know your background, sort of what was your trajectory into real estate, right? Which is a lot of stuff. So we could cover it at a high level, but it's like, tell people a little bit about what got you into real estate, what your journey has been, because it's been very impressive and touching a lot of different parts of the industry that I think people think are really interesting.
Yeah. So all right, I'll give the sort of the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, give the quick one, and then because I'm going to keep making you go back and dive in, so we'll get there. Yeah,
I'm happy to do that. So I was a sophomore in college, and I got my real estate license for a summer job of selling timeshares. You had to have a license in California.
Wow, really? Like in classic timeshare. Sorry, I'm already interrupting. Are we talking like classic, like closed room, like sit down, do the seminar, timeshare sales like that?
Yeah, hardcore 90-minute presentations, and that summer job turned into like 3 years of doing that. And I was making really good money. Actually, bought my first townhome when I was 20 years old. And during that time, I met a real estate broker. And for 3 years from the time I met him, he kept recruiting me, saying, hey, you should get into residential real estate. You'll be great. Come work for me. You'll love it. And for 3 years, he'd write me notes. He'd call me every time I saw him. He'd bring it up. And the reality is, one day he caught me at a weak moment. I was in between ventures, and I was seeing him about something else. And during that meeting, he was successful in getting me to say, okay, I'll give it a try. And so that's how I got into real estate. That first year, I was Rookie of the Year in San Diego. Every year, my business went up, even at that time as we were heading into a down market. Within several years, I was one of the top 10 agents in the country for the national company that I was with. In 2004, I switched companies. So after 16 years with that same company and being one of the top 10 agents in the country, I switched to another company, which was Keller Williams. And within a few years, opened up some franchises. A few more years, became the number one Keller Williams agent in the world. And then in 2010, they asked me if I'd be interested in taking an executive role with them and helping them expand Keller Williams globally around the world. And I did. I knew nothing about it. I didn't know how to. It was completely new, completely uncharted waters for me and them. But the good news is I figured it out, became very successful. Within 5 years, they then asked me to become the CEO of the company, which I did. And I finally left Keller Williams about 5 years ago, and in 2017. And then I've had a real estate team all along, and still have a real estate team in San Diego. And after I left Keller Williams, I got introduced to the founder of Loan Depot, which is the second largest non-bank lender in the world. And after meeting with him 10 different times, I joined him and became the CEO of his sister company called Mellow Home, and did that. During that time, I was advising several startup companies and invested in several startup companies. And one of them, this one, Ojo Labs, I became a board member of. And then in 2019, they asked me to join them full time. The company was really growing. They could really use me. And I thought it'd be a fun adventure. And so that's still where I'm at. And what we're doing is building an exciting company.
Yeah. I mean, that whole journey is so amazing. And there's so many different pieces I want to dive into. I actually want to start all the way back at the beginning, because like one of the things I love about this story is the broker who spends 3 years following up with you being like, hey, you should come and work with me, right? Like, I love the dedication, right? And like clearly they saw something in you. So I'm curious, what do you think they saw in you that made them want to put in that amount of effort and time to get you over to their team, right? Like, what was it that sort of drove them? Because obviously it's like the timeshare thing is like such a particular thing, right? It's so unique in a lot of ways. What made them go after you, you think?
Yeah, Dan, that's a great question. And back then, I would say there probably wasn't much. Like, I was so young and raw and new. I think if anything, he probably saw that I was very quiet, very introverted, but I was very driven. And he probably got a sense of that I had this drive, this desire to achieve. And during that process of those 3 years, I saw a lot and learned a lot. Like, I understood, I really got the meaning of someone being persistent, of someone being consistent in their efforts, and what it really meant to do that at a high level. And so that is, I think, but back to your question, I think he just saw that I had this sort of this quiet, pretty high drive to achieve.
I'm curious too, and I promise I will move on from timeshare soon, but I'm like fascinated by timeshare sales. And actually was on the podcast of a very good friend of mine, Matt Kimberly, who also came up through timeshare sales. So it was like his first introduction to sales. He ended up going into sales coaching and consulting. He was very successful, right? So I'm curious, like, do you look back on that time and feel like you took away, you mentioned persistence, but like, what were the lessons that you feel like you took away from that? Because I think a lot of people look at timeshare sales and say like, oh, it's over the top, super hard sale, trap them in the room or whatever. Is there anything from that time period you feel like you still apply today?
Absolutely. If I had any fear of rejection, it completely obliterated that. So I had no fears of rejection after doing that for several years. Also, the other thing I took away that really helped me when I got into residential real estate was being able to make a concise and effective presentation. As I got into residential real estate, if you were thinking about selling your home, you'd probably interview several agents. If I was one of those agents, I had a presentation that wasn't special, but it was effective and it followed a pattern. And it's the same type of thing when I did as I was selling timeshares. So it was a combination of questions that would lead us down a path to where we wanted to get to. So being able to really learn how to present, because I was presenting 3 or 4 times a day, 90-minute presentations. And I was pretty much doing it 7 days a week because they would let me, and going to school at night. And so I got pretty proficient at doing that.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me, right? It's like you're just getting reps in, which is so valuable, right? Especially in a young age. So, all right. So let's kind of fast forward. Let's talk a little bit about Keller Williams. Obviously it's a giant in the industry. It's a company that everybody knows, and you were at the top of that company. But I am very curious about this period where you got into, you sort of come up to the executive level for the first time, right? And just like you said, like it was a new thing for you. You weren't really sure what it was going to be like, but you ended up figuring it out. So you've been in a bunch of situations, I think, in your career where you sort of go into new territory. It's obviously related to what you do, but it's some kind of new application. So thinking back to that time, how did you deal with being in a new part of the business, new responsibilities that you didn't have experience with? Was that nerve-wracking? Was it exciting? And kind of how do you navigate that? Because I think a lot of people would hold themselves back from making that jump because they feel like, well, I don't have the experience. I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, I certainly didn't have the experience. I certainly didn't know what to do. Yeah, sure. It was probably nerve-wracking, but it occurred to me as a big opportunity and a super big challenge. And I like those two things, right? I like big opportunities. I like big challenges. In fact, in my mind, it teetered on the edge of being impossible. Like, how am I going to do this? No one at the company knows anything about it. They're not saying, Chris, we believe you can do this and we're hiring you to do this and you need to go figure it out. And so that seemed like, like the biggest mountain to climb at the time. And I like that. And I like that challenge. So I went at it very aggressively and jumped into it. Now, all of it was new, having spent 26 years running my own real estate team as the boss, and now being in a company where you're an executive and you have all these different people in different organizations, I had to learn a whole new set of skills. The good news is I learned pretty quickly, and I learned by observing a lot. So when I'm in a situation, I can quickly assess, what I need to do and who I need to work with to help accomplish the things I want to accomplish. But it was a new process, a new set of skills for sure.
When you're making that assessment, right? So you say like you primarily, maybe not primarily, but you were learning a lot by observation. You're modeling people, right? How do you assess who to look at and who to learn from, right? Because in any situation, you have people that are successful essentially by accident, right? Just statistically, that's going to be the case. Maybe not by accident, but it's not necessarily what they did that got them to where they are, right? And then you also have people who are very much there as purely a product of stuff that they did. So how, and you could talk about Keller Williams, or you could bring it to the future and say, hey, if I'm in a new situation, here's how I do that. Kind of generically, if you don't want to talk about specifics there.
Yeah.
How do you decide how to model or who to look at?
Well, look, I'm always looking for people who are doing more than me or better at things than I am, to see what I can learn from them. And then I also always operate on this sort of this guise or philosophy of failing fast. Like I know I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I don't like it, and it's not my goal. But I also know if I'm making mistakes that I'm trying hard and going fast. As long as I'm failing forward in my mistakes and learning from them, then I know I'm going to grow and learn very fast. And so there was the CEO of the company at the time was a great leader and has since become a great friend. And so he was a great role model for me and a great, in a way, a great mentor for me to be able to see what he's done and how he's done it, and to be able to model some of the things after that. As I mentioned earlier, I've had a lot of great mentors in my life. So with all of them, there's been takeaways, things that you learn that you take on and you do, and then things you learn from them that you don't want to do, or that aren't good things to do. But those are, when you jump into a new situation like that, it's, I've also, I think, just intuitively knew, don't act like I know what I don't know, and don't be afraid to ask questions, and watch, listen, and learn, and then start to move forward and then move faster and faster.
So I'm curious, you like you mentioned, you're a CEO of Keller Williams. You're sort of at the very top of such a large organization. I am curious what you think that they do particularly well. Or if you wanted to take that question somewhere else, when you are looking at other companies, what do you look for in order to say, like, this is a company that's going to be successful, that's going to be able to sort of achieve their goals? Does that make sense? Like, what do you think is either the sort of like, not quite the secret sauce, but something that Keller Williams either does really well, or something that you look for in a similar company where you're like, they've got it?
Yeah. So, at the time, and I've been gone 5 years, so I can't really speak to, there's what I observed from an outsider now. But at the time, they did some things that they did better than anyone else in the industry. So at the time, training and education, they were hands down the best training and education company in the industry. And so they had a unique value proposition that we could build off of. When I look at other companies, those are some of the things I look for. Now, when I look at companies, the first thing I look at is the people, the leadership. Are they good people? Are they great leaders? Are they aligned? Is it a company full of political maneuvers, or is it a company that's really a tight team that's on a mission to achieve something? Because I think people are the most important thing. What the company has, its assets, it's where it's going, what it's doing, is secondary to the team that ultimately has to make it all happen.
So I love that. I mean, it makes the follow-up question that I would have then, I guess, is how do you spot a good leader, right? Because if you're essentially saying, okay, well, you invest in the company, but you really are investing in people because the company is just people, right? And you are really looking for someone who's a good leader. You could have a leader that's charismatic per se, but maybe isn't the best decision maker, or maybe is a great decision maker, but doesn't have that sort of natural charisma that kind of, flows across the conference table or whatever. So if you're looking at, for example, some of the startups that you've invested in, how have you kind of trained yourself to spot people that are great leaders or great at putting together teams that work together well?
Yeah. So I think part of it is they got to be great human beings, right? The best leaders that I've seen and met are the ones that people follow them because of who they are, not because of their position or their title, or that they want to get somewhere. They follow them because they're great people and great humans. Another way to judge how effective someone is as a leader is to look at how effective the people are that they're leading. Are they building leaders? Are they leading leaders? Are the people below them thriving and growing and progressing? Or are they keeping them down? Or are people leaving them? So those are the things that you look at that give you signs of whether someone's a great leader or not. I think another thing is, are they someone that you are ready and willing, to go to battle with every day? Do you like them? Do you respect them? Do you trust them? Those things have to be present. And if they're not, then it's probably going to be a temporary situation.
Yeah, just because you won't last, essentially. Like
you won't last, and it won't be, it won't ultimately be fulfilling, or you'll find out that, things were a lot shinier on the outside than they were on the inside once you get on the inside.
I want to get to Ojo Labs in a moment, but I do want to ask about building and running a team. Because you have built and run teams at basically every different possible level of size of business, right down from your real estate team all the way up to being CEO of, a gigantic real estate company. Now you're coming in as an investor and a mentor and a board member, working with teams of various sizes. How do you think through the process of building a team, right? Because this is something, I always say, like, the podcast is just a secret way for me to ask questions to people smarter than me. Like, one of my big challenges has been putting together a team that gels both in terms of just personality, everybody gets along, and has a really high standard of performance, right? And I've sort of built both of those, but not at the same time, right? And so I'm getting better, but I'm always curious how people who have done that consistently think through that problem.
There's a couple things that I always look at. One is to hire talented people. So, and the most talented I can find. People that are better than me at the things that I need them to do. And I'm not afraid to have super talented people and people smarter than me and better than me and that. In fact, I know that I need that to be able to get to where I want to go, or help the company get to where we want it to go. I also look for specific types of people, people that can speak. People that like to be on a team, people that thrive in a team environment. There's some people that are better on their own, and they're a solo superstar and great and good for them. I'm looking for people that are great teammates, are great humans, that have high integrity, that are going to that are trustworthy, that are loyal, right? All the pieces that you'd want when you put a team together. And when you have a team of people like that, then you can really accomplish things. Then you got everyone rowing in the same direction and marching to the same beat and whatever other cliche we want to use to achieve things that are going to be extraordinary.
Are there like markers for that? Like, do you look for like they played varsity sports or something, right? Like, how do you sort of figure that out?
That's one that I used to always ask people. Did you play sports growing up? And it wasn't a bias towards someone if they did or didn't. I just wanted to understand. Have they experienced being on a team before? Have they experienced winning as a team and losing as a team? Or did they play individual sports? And not that would be a deciding factor, but it would help me understand who I was sitting in front of. I would also want to know about their past. We've talked a little bit about, my trajectory, but I'd want to see what their trajectory was. And I want to understand more about it, and what were the challenges they faced and how did they respond to those challenges? Were they a victim about it? Did they blame the situation or the person or the situation? Or, were they self-aware enough to say, hey, here's what I didn't know at the time or what I wasn't very good at or what I had to get better at. And here's what I did to do that. Did they, every time they fell down, did they, look at someone else to play the blame or look at themselves and say, okay, here's what I did and here's how I got better and here's how that helped me moving forward. So there's all those signs that people will share with you if you ask the right questions.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me that balance of team spirit or like sort of team commitment and also the willingness to take personal responsibility, right? If you can put those things together in a talented person, that's a really powerful package. I really like that way of thinking about it.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed part 1 of this episode. It's just too good to limit to one show. Join us next week to hear the rest.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.